parties at which information, be it important or not, was clearly exchanged. And how can it be that Mr. Corbyn hasn't said a single word about it? His agent has written this off as all being like a bad James Bond movie. How can it be that until Theresa May, the Prime Minister, questioned him and said he needed to be rather more open about this, that organisations as worthy as the BBC were not even putting this on their website? Why was it, I said, not a bigger story? And given everything that's been said about Russian collusion over the Trump campaign and Brexit, and my own, I have to say, sadly, massively overinflated role as the centre of some spider's web that somehow I've been running information between Trump and Assange, and I've been funded by the Russians, and all of that seems to be absolutely fine to talk about ad nauseam. How could it be that there was so little coverage of this issue? Well, I tell you what, I didn't need to wait very long, because this morning, taking questions after his speech to manufacturers, Jeremy Corbyn responded to a journalist, John Stevens from the Daily Mail, by saying the stories about him and a Czech spy during the Cold War were nonsense.
John Stevens from the Daily Mail. Mr. Corbyn, you say you want these business leaders to put their trust in you to run the country. How can they do that when serious questions remain about your past? And will you give permission for your stars and Farage to release to help clear things up?
Thanks for your question. I'm very sorry that the Daily Mail has reduced itself to reproducing some nonsense that was written in the Sun beforehand.
Sean Kennedy at Channel 4 News. Don't worry.
I thought this was a meeting in which engineering employees got a chance to ask questions rather than the media.
He was asked once again by another journalist.
Final question, are you a Czech spy?
No.
Well, this went on through the course of the day. And very interesting that, and okay, you know, you can argue that some newspapers, like the Sun or the Mail, have a different political view, and you may not wish to expose yourself to being interviewed by them. But, you know, the broadcast media, whether it's ITV or the BBC or LBC or whatever it is, you know, they're actually regulated quite strictly. And yet he refused to do any media broadcast interviews on this subject today, despite, after that press conference, following his speech to manufacturers, there being a huge clamour. And then, within the last hour, rather than going to the press, Jeremy Corbyn has released his own video. This is what he has to say.
In the last few days, the Sun, the Mail, the Telegraph, the Express have all gone a little bit James Bond. They found a former Czechoslovakian spy whose claims are increasingly wild and entirely false. He seems to believe I kept him informed about what Margaret Thatcher had for breakfast, and says he was responsible for either Live Aid or the Mandela concert, or maybe both. It's easy to laugh, but something more serious is happening. Publishing these ridiculous smears that have been refuted by Czech officials shows just how worried the media bosses are by the prospect of a Labour government. They're right to be. Labour will stand up to the powerful and corrupt and take the side of the many, not the few. A free press is essential for democracy, and we don't want to close it down, we want to open it up. At the moment, much of our press isn't very free at all. In fact, it's controlled by billionaire tax exiles who are determined to dodge paying their fair share for our vital public services. The general election showed the media barons are losing their influence, and social media means their bad old habits are becoming less and less relevant. But instead of learning these lessons, they're continuing to resort to lies and smears. Their readers, you, all of us, deserve so much better. Well, we've got news for them. Change is coming.
Change is coming. If you're out there and you're part of the free press, change is coming. That in the latter part of the Corbyn statement after an initial attempt to laugh it all off. I'm kind of thinking he might be in a bit of trouble over this. Because not once during that 1 minute and 39 seconds that he's given as his response to the clamour for questions about how many times he met this Czech agent during the 1980s, not once has he basically confirmed or denied how many times they met. It's very interesting. I mean, Tom Newton-Dunn from The Sun, who, and it was The Sun that broke this to begin with, and Newton-Dunn says, Jeremy Corbyn describes The Sun reporting of his links to a Czech intelligence officer as nonsense. But again, he does not deny holding 4 different meetings with him or explain why they happened. Now look, was Jeremy Corbyn back in the 1980s passing on very top secret information to people who were part of the Soviet bloc? I actually have to say, I really rather doubt it. He wasn't important enough. He wouldn't have known very much. He was pretty much isolated on the Labour backbenches by his own party. He wouldn't, I don't think, have been privy to very much. But I tell you what, if the allegation was, did he collude with agents who were part of the Soviet Union? Well, I would have thought the answer to that appears to me to be yes. So let's be clear. Allegations have been made by this man, Sarkozy, Jan Sarkozy, who was in London working for the Czechoslovakian government. Allegations have been made that a series of meetings happened and they talked about current affairs, etc. Sarkozy also said there were many other Labour figures on the left, and particularly those who've been involved with CND and those kind of organisations who did have meetings with their agents. He also said that money did, red gold as it was known at the time, money did change hands, but he hasn't specifically said at any point that Jeremy Corbyn received any of it. And I'm saying that because I do want this debate to be fair, but I'm struck that if you don't take any questions from ITV, the BBC or LBC, if you refuse to do any broadcast interviews and you then come out attacking the free press, I suspect you're in a little bit of trouble. I suspect you've got something to hide. So I want to know tonight, do these allegations matter to you as a Labour voter? I'm particularly keen to hear from people who are inclined to vote Labour. Now, you may say to me, it doesn't matter one jot. And it could be that it's only people over the age of about 45 who even remember what communism was all about. So perhaps it's not relevant. So if you think it doesn't matter a damn, he's a fine figure of a man, call me on 0345 60 973. Or perhaps like me, you're asking the question, why won't he deny the meetings took place? And if they did, why doesn't he just ask for his Stasi file so that he can reveal in public the information they had on him? And in that case, you can text me at 84850. You can tweet your thoughts or questions using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And I tell you what, if you want to come on and speculate, imagine these claims have been made about me. Imagine that somebody working for Putin said, last year I met Nigel Farage 4 times. We often met up with Brexit politicians, and in some cases, money changed hands. How do you think I'd be getting on with the national media right now if somebody had made these allegations against me? And of course, as ever, I'm here in London. You can watch us on Facebook and you can make your comments there too. Do these allegations about Jeremy Corbyn matter? And I'm particularly keen to hear if you're a Labour voter. I'm going to go to Kevin, a brand new caller to the show, who lives in Hillingdon. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Yeah, I just made a shock surprise. The media again attacking Corbyn. I'm no friend of Corbyn's. I'm actually a Green supporter. I think they stole most of our policies from our last election anyway.
Corbyn, Kevin, Corbyn in many ways is quite green, isn't he?
Well, he's not as radical as the Green Party in a lot of ways, including proportional representation, but that's an argument.
Okay.
There's a famous non-mentioned named owner of an airline who always said, publicity, good or bad, is always good. Mm-hmm. And I believe the Conservative Party and the people that back them are concerned that there's going to be an election this year, and let's rubbish Corbyn like we did before, because we want to get people not to vote for him, and it's just going to end up the opposite way. I'm just absolutely not surprised at all. Don't believe any of it.
Okay. Okay.
We'll see.
Okay, Kevin, I'm hearing what you say. I mean, would it be fair to say that Corbyn quite consistently had a record of meeting and supporting organisations that neither Conservative nor Labour governments were in favour of, such as Sinn Féin IRA, inviting them to meetings in the House of Commons, such as many of the things he said about Hamas and Hezbollah. And Kevin, he was, you know, a paid-up supporter of the campaign for nuclear disarmament, very much on the Marxist wing of the Labour Party. Do you not think, Kevin, I mean, do you know what? I've had lots of allegations made about me, most of them untrue, thank goodness, but some of them true. And, you know, if I was asked the question, Kevin, had I still been leader of UKIP, you know, had I met this Russian agent, I couldn't really dodge it, could I? I'd have to say either I'd met them or I hadn't. Do you not think, Kevin, that it's a fair question from the Conservative-leaning media to ask him to confirm or deny whether 4 meetings took place?
Well, not really, because, as you said, you mentioned about Sinn Féin. John Major was the first courageous Prime Minister that actually started the peace talks. You know, the
yes,
isn't really going to get the reward that Tony Blair got.
But he didn't invite them into the House of Commons within a few weeks of the Brighton bomb, did he? Well,
there you go. You're mixing terrorism and political armies with political.
Oh no, Kevin. All I'm saying to you. And all right, you're more radical than Corbyn, but all I'm saying is, you know, okay, of course, the right-wing media will attack a left-wing leader, and you know, and vice versa, and we all know that, and that's the game of politics and the world we live in. I'm just asking you, Kevin, is it not a reasonable question for Jeremy Corbyn to be asked and to answer, which he steadfastly did not do in that 1 minute and 39-second video that he's done? Is it not a fair question for him to answer whether or not he met Czechoslovakian agent Jan Sarkozy 4 times in the late 1980s?
Not really. After hearing the archive lady who runs the archive for the Czech Secret Service, no. Why aren't the right-wing press questioning her? Why don't they reveal these files and they can see for themselves?
Well, I tell you what, Kevin, if he asked for the files and we saw the files, that maybe would solve.
It's the Czech government, isn't it? They own them, not Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, but Jeremy Corbyn has to ask for them, and if he asks for them, he will get them. Let's hope he does, and we can clear it all up.
They're an archive, so surely they're open for public.
I think many things, particularly the Stasi files in East Germany, are not. But if you apply for them, you can get them. Anyway, Kevin, you've made your point of view. You made your point of view very clear indeed. Kevin, not concerned in the least. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. We're going to go to. Actually, we're not going to move on. We're going to go to Lee in Swindon. Lee, good evening.
Hi there, good evening. How are you?
I'm well. So Corbyn has really had a right go at the right-wing media, at the media barons, some of whom live overseas. But is that really relevant here, Lee?
Absolutely it is. And you and Corbyn are actually far more aligned than I think you give credit for.
Right.
You know, Corbyn, like yourself, has been an anti-establishment person, has been against the overarching powers that the EU establishment has had, and that's the reason he's trying to take things away. And unfortunately, you can't go into detail on every topic to explain things properly so people understand. But what's happening here, you know as well, it's completely transparent. Everybody in the country can see what's going on. We're not stupid, and it's an obvious smear against Corbyn. It's the most transparent, obvious smear ever. And the fact that he's not responding to the very specific points are because you're giving credit and you're allowing those points to be amplified. You know, he's not engaging in conversations about whether he had a meeting 30 years ago with some Czech spy, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And
why is it ridiculous, Lee?
What?
Why is it ridiculous?
Why is it ridiculous?
Yeah.
Well, okay, number one, what's the purpose of Parliament and government? The purpose of government is to govern, and it's to make sure that we have the services and a strong economy. The purpose of Parliament is to help guide government and represent the people. So what if one person in the representation for the whole of our parliament had a conversation with...
Well, it wasn't one person, was it?
You disagree with?
It wasn't one person, Lee, was it? Because actually what's being said is that several Labour MPs were meeting with this agent and with other agents from the Soviet bloc.
Yeah. I personally don't know the absolute ins and outs. I don't think anybody does, apart from Corbyn, the spy, and other people in question. But it's not unusual. I mean, for example, the government, there's this smear that always comes out about Corbyn speaking to the IRA. Actually, the government were negotiating with the IRA.
Later on they were. Lee, later on they were. You're right. John Major did, in secret, meet the IRA, and it did lead to a process that Blair concluded, with the Good Friday Agreement. And you're absolutely right about that. However, I think...
Talking to people is a good thing. Talking to people of different opinions is a good thing. That's how you bring consensus.
Is it a good thing? Is it a good thing, Lee?
You and Corbyn are far more similar.
Is it a good thing, Lee, for an MP to talk to an enemy of the state?
Well, personally, I think there's a line where negotiating possibly with ISIS might be a little bit extreme. Again, we don't know the ins and outs, so you can't put that conjecture out and try and smear. But just going back to the point, why didn't Corbyn answer the questions, which was your topic?
Yeah.
The reason he didn't answer the questions is because he doesn't want to amplify this ridiculous smear. Everyone can see it's a smear. Everybody knows.
Lee, I tell you what, matey, this is not going away. This story is not going away. And I think...
Well, of course it's not going away, because the billionaires who have everything to lose by a Labour government coming into power are absolutely petrified of the prospect of Corbyn getting in. So
would it be reasonable, Lee, to think that your middle-of-the-road Labour voter would want to know whether the leader of the Labour Party had been working with communist agents during the 1980s? Is that not, given the allegations that have been made, a fair question to ask?
Okay, going back to the point, amplifying a smear is not the right approach for a politician to take when they're trying to draw the focus of argument to austerity, lack of funding for our public services, our position in the world.
Lee, I know that. I've been there.
Get distracted.
I've been there, but I've been there, and I've done my best to brush off ludicrous allegations that were made against me, but ultimately it's really difficult in this world. If you're leading a party, if you're potentially a Prime Minister, you can't dodge this forever. And I suggest to you, Lee, that by not doing a face-to-face interview with one of the major broadcasters today and choosing to do this video and attacking the media barons, I suggest to you, Lee, he's actually made this a bit worse for himself.
To an end. Let me ask you one question. So remember the coverage that the BBC gave to Donald Trump in the run-up to the presidential elections?
Yep.
Can you remember how biased that and I'm no Trump fan, but I could see it was black and white.
Yep.
Even in the morning when I woke up and I was watching the coverage that was given and the way that Hillary Clinton was being talked up and the way that, so you can see the bias there. So on one hand, you're saying, speak to these broadcasters because they're fair and regulated, but actually, that's not
Lee,
the case.
Lee, all I'm saying is that if Jeremy Corbyn thinks that he can avoid answering this fundamental question of whether or not he held 4 meetings with Jean Sarkozy in the 1980s, if he thinks he can dodge that, I think, Lee, he's deluding himself.
But what? Let's say you had those meetings, but ask yourself this question. Okay, let's say you had these meetings. What is the negative impact of him even... I'm not saying that he did, and I'm not saying I agree or reject, but if he had those meetings, what impact does that actually have right now, right here? What do you think he's going to do if he gets into government because he had a meeting 30, 40 years ago?
One of the reasons, Lee...
The meetings that you've had in gentlemen's clubs in the 80s, I'm sure they're pretty spicy, but... you can't
well, thank you. Thank you for writing my CV, Lee. That's very sweet of you. I think what it comes down to is this. One of the reasons Corbyn did well in the election campaign, and he did do well, come on, he connected, he had energy, and I said it on this show the day he launched the manifesto. I said, wow, I've never seen Corbyn like this. And one of the reasons he connected was because he appeared to be very straight, very open, and you've now got a question that is being asked, and it may well be, Lee, they had nothing of any import to discuss at all, because Corbyn didn't know anything, because he wasn't in a position to. But if he continues to run away, I think there'll be Labour voters that start to ask the question. Lee, great call. Thank you. Going to go to Andy, another new caller from Edinburgh. Good evening, Andy.
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
So, are you a Corbyn supporter, detractor?
Well, I'm not a Labour supporter. I was a long time ago. So I'm not. I wouldn't vote Labour. I'm Scottish, so I actually vote SNP. However, I feel so sorry for the guy. I think he finds it must be impossible to answer all these allegations in the right-wing media, especially the Mail, especially the Express and the Sun, because it seems to be now every single week there's a new allegation against him. So you're asking, why isn't he, coming out? I think silence is sometimes the best option for him, because the right-wing media are out to crucify him, and it must be so difficult for him to constantly try and refute all these allegations.
Andy, I had in 2013, 14, 15, I had the right-wing media against me and the left-wing media against me. Apart from when Richard Desmond's Express gave us support, I had everyone against me. So I'm used to all of this, and I'm used to... And Andy, I've had it in the last few months. Accusations by a Guardian journalist that somehow I've been colluding with the Russians. No basis of evidence whatsoever on any of it, but this stuff gets written. So politics is a rough, tough, nasty game, and you're right to say that the Mail and the Sun and the Telegraph will give Corbyn a bashing whenever they can. Of course they will.
Yeah.
But, of course they will, Andy. But Andy, all right. In some ways, I feel sorry for anybody that's under a media bombardment, because I've kind of lived it. I know what it's like. But the point I'm making, Andy, is here we have somebody who's a former Czech agent who claims he met Corbyn in the 80s on 4 separate occasions. It was part of a network of Labour MPs he and his colleagues were talking to. He also says in some instances money changed hands. Now that may well be spicing it up for the story.
Yeah.
And I get that too. But Andy, my point is, I don't think Corbyn can ignore this question.
Okay, but I'm sure that you can see how the media works, as it seems to be able to print whatever it wants without any basis, without any facts.
I know.
Especially the newspapers like the Mail or the Sun. And what happens is, as long as it prints it, the damage is done, because some people will believe that. And that is part of especially the right-wing media's aim. As long as they damage some people...
Andy, they're as bad as each other, whether they're on the right or the left. They all play the same game. And actually, that's part of a free press. You just have to live with it. Enoch Powell, a right-wing figure, once said that a politician complaining about the press is like a sailor complaining about rough seas. So you have to live with it. But and sometimes... And I've been there, I've had all sorts of things said about me, allegations made. Sometimes you are best just to ignore it, not to stoop to a level of responding. But I have a feeling, Andy, that this question of whether he met this guy on 4 occasions is going to come up again and again and again. And in the end, I think he's going to have to answer it.
Okay. I'll tell you, I hope nothing comes of it. I hope, because to me, he does seem like a genuinely good guy. Mm-hmm. As I say, I'm not a Labour fan. I wouldn't vote for Labour after the Scottish independence debacle. However, he does seem like he's a genuine good guy. And I think, obviously, the media barons and the multi-millionaires are sort of running scared of him. And so they're basically trying anything, to basically smear him. That's the way
I think they are running scared of him, Andy. I think actually a lot of business people in the United Kingdom are very scared. And I think they're actually, to be honest with you, they're less scared of Corbyn than they are of the Shadow Chancellor, the self-proclaimed Marxist John McDonnell, who was talking the other day about taking companies back into public ownership, and I couldn't see where the compensation was going to come from for the shareholders. So yeah, there are people in the capitalist economy, in the business world, who are scared of Corbyn. I get that. Andy, I thank you very much indeed for the call. Spot on, Nigel. If this spy scandal involved you or Theresa May, the media would be in a psychotic frenzy, says June in Edgware. The thing that is terrifying is how comfortable Corbyn and his supporters are with dismissing any allegations as fake news and then attacking press freedom, I get on Twitter. Questioning Corbyn just because some random spy from a European country made a comment without any evidence is just showing your own fears about Corbyn's personality. He is the Prime Minister in waiting, says Arif. Arif, you know, I have been told, it's been said, that the next time I land in the USA, the FBI... glass of vodka now and again. I've had no connections with Russia in any way at all. So all sorts of accusations get made without any basis, but Corbyn can't avoid, did he meet this guy 4 times or not? That's my view. Linda, a new caller from Liverpool. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, what do you think?
How are you?
I'm well. I'm very well, and I'm watching...
You have to watch your hubcaps when you've been in Liverpool in case anyone stole your wheels.
The last couple of times I've been to Liverpool, Linda, I've had an absolutely wonderful time.
Well, thank you for that. Oh, and by the way, Nigel, good timing on getting out of UKIP at the right time. Anyway, that's by the by. I want to talk about Mr. Corbyn.
Yeah.
Now, I'm quite well versed. I remember the Harold Wilson days. They accused him of the same thing. They accused Michael Foot, Redhead, etc. I suspect the right-wing press are doing this for one reason and one reason alone. I mean, you know all the slurs over Redhead. I mean, God love him, they even degraded his father, the right-wing press. It's simple as this. They've got nothing positive to say about the Tories. Boris's lousy speech, Theresa May's lousy behaviour. I mean, what a leader. My God, I could do better.
I'm sure.
rather than admit to the faults of the Tories, they've gone once again to attack a decent man with decent politics. In 1983, Corbyn had less power than what he's got now. I mean, my God.
Linda, I understand that. And do you know what? I'm of the view, I've said it already.
You said prior to me speaking to you.
I'm of the view that he had no information to give them. But Linda, doesn't he?
What's he going to do about the shareholders, giving them compensation? That's exactly my point. The shareholders... Only a right-wing person would be concerned about the shareholders.
No. Well, Linda, I tell you what, Linda, if you get your way, we'll head towards bankruptcy and poverty. You can't steal people's assets. Linda, let me ask you a very quick question. Do you think it is reasonable, and yeah, you're right, a lot of those press are against him, is it reasonable for him to be asked to answer the question whether he met Czechoslovakian communist agent Jean...
Look, I'm not listening to that nonsense.
Linda, should he answer that question, yes or no?
No!
Fine, OK, fine. Linda, you've got your point of view. You hold it very strongly, as many do. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:32 and we're discussing Jeremy Corbyn. Is it a right-wing media conspiracy? Are they being beastly? Are they being unfair? Or do you ask yourself the question, given the allegations that have been made by this former Czechoslovakian communist agent, Jan Sarkozy, that they'd met 4 times back in the 1980s, do you ask yourself the question why, in the face of that, he's run away from doing any broadcast media interviews today, but done his own 1-minute 39-second video in which he doesn't actually address any of those issues, but just attacks the press and says to them, change is coming, which some read as being somewhat sinister. Now, not quite as dramatic as that, in fact really rather dull, was the speech today given about the post-Brexit UK by Brexit Secretary David Davis, and he said that we won't be like Mad Max. There will not be a global race to the bottom in terms of regulation. In fact, he said that the United Kingdom will be the same country it was post-Brexit. I wonder, David Davis, don't you realise the reason people voted for Brexit is they voted for change? They don't want things to be exactly the same. They want things to change. And I really feel it's about time that David Davis and the rest of this government stopped apologising for Brexit, but actually started to embrace it and say, this is going to be great, we're going to be more competitive, there'll be fantastic opportunities for us out there in the world. I didn't see any of that today. I saw a slogan about shared history, shared futures. It was the same backdrop Theresa May had used in Florence. It is a very, very mixed message, and is not saying, come on, we're leaving, we've made a decision, and it's going to be great. None of that did I see today. Really thought, I have to say, it was very, very weak indeed. But back to Jeremy Corbyn. Should he answer these questions? Is he right just to ignore it and attack the right-wing media barons? I'm going to ask Rupert in Maidenhead that very question.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Am I too late to wish you a Happy New Year?
Well, Chinese New Year was only a couple of weeks ago, I think, so I'd accept one of those.
Exactly. Well, thank you. My point here is, and Nigel, I don't know if you remember, we spoke before. I actually sang
You've been on the show before, yeah.
I sang a beautiful rendition of "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn" to you.
I remember it, and you were. I mean, you are completely sold on Corbyn, Rupert, if I remember you rightly.
That is correct, Nigel.
Okay, good. Good. Well, you are the perfect caller then for this subject. Do you have, Rupert, you know, and you can give me another Jeremy Corbyn in a minute, but are you concerned in the least about these meetings that are said to have happened back in the 1980s?
So my concern is not necessarily with the meetings, because we don't know the content of the meetings, do we?
Well, no, Rupert. Let's go back a step. What Jeremy Corbyn will not confirm or deny is whether the meetings took place at all.
So I think there is a clear challenge there. You know, we won't confirm whether they did or not happen. But my real bugbear today, Nigel, and I think you can join us in this,
right?
Because
Try me.
I'm not going to try and wave the Labour flag at you, but my bugbear is with the media. It's with the mainstream media who kind of sit in that category, conservative but remain. You know, and my frustration with all this is that they clearly see Labour as a threat. They clearly see Brexit as a threat. And they're just sniping. They're on the radar. Oh, Corbyn did this. Corbyn did that. Right. Let's blow it out of catastrophe. You know, let's make an absolute meal out of it. You know, the Sun. I don't know if you remember on the day of the election in the summer, the day before the election, they had Corbyn with a picture of him on the front saying Corbyn. You know, a little play on his surname.
Yeah.
The next day, you know, after the whole catastrophe of the election, absolute balls up with the DUP and the coalition, they're like, oh, what a catastrophe. I'm sorry, the mainstream media. You need to be held accountable to this. You need to be informative.
But Rupert, the newspapers, whether it's the Sun or the Mirror on the other side, they are held accountable because we can just stop buying it.
Yes, well, that's what we need to do, and this is why I love LBC. You know, so we've got you on the show this evening talking about your opinions, but early in the day we had Mr. James O'Brien. You know, and this is the thing that frustrates me, is that, you know, the Sky, BBC, all of them just they see Corbyn as a threat. You know, the big bankers see Corbyn as a threat, and we need, you know, the media needs to be held accountable. Yeah, quite right. We need to stop buying it. I don't buy the Sun anymore. I think it's absolutely disgrace.
Well, actually, Rupert, LBC is a great station, not just because it has people with views as diverse as myself and James O'Brien, and they certainly are pretty different on virtually everything under the sun. But the greatness, I think, of LBC is, and I sit here in the studio, and I'm surrounded by TV screens, right? So I've got all the news, current affairs programmes on in here, and upstairs we've got the American ones. And do you know what, Rupert? Generally now, what cable TV and rolling news, it's journalists talking to journalists. That's kind of what it is. And the thing about LBC is we get people like you, Rupert, from Maidenhead, Theresa May's constituency, a Corbynista, coming on and singing, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn." No, but the point is, it's here that we get, it's the only opportunity, really, on a national platform that people get to come on and really debate issues. And I think that's what works about it. Now, Rupert, I'm going to ask you one last time. Should Corbyn answer the question about whether he had these meetings back in the 1980s?
Absolutely, he needs to.
Yeah.
And every politician, whether it's Trump, Cameron, Theresa, the appeaser,
You've nicked my term there.
I use it all the time. We don't. I know you don't wave the Conservative flag, but I certainly don't either.
Rupert, tell me, if Corbyn continues to avoid and evade the press and not answer this question, would your opinion of him diminish?
It would a bit, but what I want to see in the press is actually talk about the good things he's doing. I'm going to take a quote from James O'Brien. The reason I like Corbyn is because he knows that the hospitals, the schools, the housing in this country is a mess, and we need to do something about it. He hasn't come out with a clear structural tactic, but he's said, and I'll say it to any sort of Conservative or any...
Everyone says that, Rupert, at every election. Everyone says that. They all say that. I mean, Rupert, where's the... Unless they're going to steal money off shareholders on a genuinely industrial scale, where's the money coming from?
I will tell you where the money can start to come from. Mr. Lord Ashcroft, who avoided £200 million in tax.
Right. Whether that's true or not, Rupert, whether that's true or not, if you were to try and take money off people like him, he just wouldn't come to this country, so he wouldn't get it anyway.
That's fine. We don't. Well, yeah, but I think.
Rupert, the richest 1%, Rupert. And we're going completely off the subject here. The richest 1% in this country pay nearly 30% of the taxes in this country. If you send a message to the richest 1% that you're not welcome any longer, you've got a problem. Anyway, Rupert, listen, it's a pleasure to have you on. Let's see whether he answers these questions or not. I'm pleased, as a Corbynite, that you think he should answer them. Give us an old Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, Jeremy Corbyn.
Very good, Rupert, thank you. Well, we do get the odd regular caller. They're mostly new callers, but that was quite fun, I thought. I'm going to ask Ian in Stoke. Do you think, Ian, Corbyn needs to answer these questions?
Evening, Nigel.
Evening.
Very simple answer to a very simple question. Yes. Now, before I explain my reason why, can I just thank you for using the accountability and the analogy of if we could stop buying newspapers?
Yes.
I'm a Liverpool fan, and like millions of them, we stopped buying The Sun years ago because of what they did. That's called accountability.
It's accountability, it's the free market, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. And nice and simple. I remember a couple of years ago, and without obviously talking about my own political persuasion, I remember a couple of years ago a gentleman called Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader of the Labour Party and talking all about open, transparent and honest politics. He's going to be the man who's going to do everything differently the way the public want to see it. I don't see that right now with regards to this issue. And when he's been asked a direct question, he has not answered it. Now, the very simple truth is, journalists, as you well know, will go fishing a lot of the time, but they won't go fishing without a little bit of smoke. And generally, they work on the sort of two sets of information rule. If they've only heard it once, they don't believe it. If they heard it twice, hang on a minute, we're going to think about it. When they've heard it 2, 3, 4 times, they're going to fish. Now, if Jeremy is absolutely adamant that he did not meet anybody in the 1980s, 90s, whatever, I don't really care.
Well, we don't know, Ian. We don't know. That's
exactly.
Yeah.
He should just do one thing, Nigel, very simple. He either comes out and says no,
Yep.
or he says to the newspapers that he's now up against, I'm going to sue you.
I'm going to sue you for putting something in the press that is slanderous or defamation.
Do you know what? Even if, Ian, everything they've written is wholly untrue, I would not recommend Jeremy Corbyn sues them. I've been involved in libel cases. I've been on both sides of them. And the trouble with libel, Ian, is that it literally consumes your whole life in terms of time and energy. And if Jeremy Corbyn wants to become the next Prime Minister, the last thing he should do is to sue anybody, in my opinion.
But there comes a level where you take the higher ground forever and ever and ever, which is what he's trying to do. And actually, sometimes the public want to just hear you say, hey, hang on a minute, lads. We haven't done this. I haven't done that, and deny it.
Do you think, Ian?
Very clearly, he hasn't.
Do you think, Ian? Somebody that looks at this stuff and cares about it. Do you think I'm right in that by refusing all broadcast interviews today, doing his own 1:39 face-to-camera video interview, that this looks like a Labour leader for the first time, somewhat on the back foot?
It looks like he's been advised in a way that I wouldn't advise him is the best way to describe it.
Well, if it all goes wrong, Ian, they may well take you on. Thank you. And I'm asked here by Philip from Whiteleaf. Well, Nigel, are you going to tell us how many times you've met Putin? This is nonsense. This is a left-wing press conspiracy. It's been written up in The Guardian and the BBC and the New York Times, and it's outrageous that I should be asked questions like this. It's wrong. It's morally completely wrong. Knows the answer. Never. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. It's exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. Well, Jeremy Corbyn was actually fascinated by the Soviet Union, a member of CND. But best of all, back in the 1980s, he went on a motorbike holiday with Diane Abbott, who was his girlfriend of the time, and boy, did they go somewhere cool. Did they go somewhere really, really exciting and sexy? Yeah, they went to Erich Honecker's East Germany. I mean, I can't imagine anywhere more ghastly to go. So perhaps he was in love with the communist system and thought we should adopt it. Perhaps he wasn't. I don't know. All I do know is that a former Czechoslovakian agent has said that he met Corbyn 4 times in the 1980s along with other Labour politicians. He's also said some of them received money. And Corbyn will not answer the question as to whether he had these meetings. And my experience as a former party leader is there are things that can be said that you can just ignore, treat with contempt. But this one he won't get away with. Such a non-story, I'm told. The 80s were years ago. How is this in any way important? This is purely to vilify Corbyn. Well, you know, there were people back in the 1980s and back to the 1930s who were working with the Soviets and working against our national interest, and people are interested in that question. Nigel, Corbyn is doing a Trump. It works for Donald. Just ignore the allegation and it will go away, says Vince in Winchester. Well, actually, no, because Trump is accused of collusion with the Russians and there's a great big inquiry going on. And actually, most of the liberal media in the world are convinced that he's guilty. As yet, no evidence as such has been produced. I am very concerned. Jeremy needs to confirm whether these meetings took place, and if they did, what was discussed, says Julian from Wigan. Labour voters will never question Corbyn for his commitment to the UK. It's just the media trying to create a fuss to divert our attention from a bad Brexit. Well, yeah, I have to agree with that bit. It's not going all that well, really, is it? And he did launch a pretty fierce attack in this video message tonight on the free press, on the media barons, and he said change is coming. Wow. I'm asked here on Facebook, who would regulate the press in this Corbyn universe? Would there be some commissar appointed? Would we have lists of subjects that were approved to be debated on LBC or not? I'm taking the mickey, but I do think it's reasonable that Corbyn should not just answer these questions, but should apply for his Stasi file and any other files that former communist governments have on him. And if he does that and publishes them, it will all simply go away. Michael is a new caller from Cambridge. Good evening, Michael.
Hello, Nigel. It's a great pleasure to speak to you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. Now, should Corbyn answer these questions and should he apply for his file?
Well, my opinion is that there should be, unlike in a communist country, the system of due process, and, going with what the law says. If there is actually evidence that he has committed, was effectively treason, if he was a member of Parliament giving information to the communists.
Well, that's taking it a bit. That's taking it a bit far, Michael. I mean,
obviously, it's taking it far. Yes, but that's what I think a lot of the media think. Well, people like the Sun think he's done. So I'm not a fan of Corbyn, and I don't like what people on both sides of the media do, where they come out with crazy accusations that he did this, he did that, he did the other. I'm like what's happening in America, for example. It is complete nonsense that Trump, in my opinion, colluded with the Russians.
Yeah.
And they are now going through a process of actually an investigation. I don't think anything will come of it, but they're going with what the law says. We shouldn't cave into what, a lot of people would like, in the media, for it to basically just be this.
Michael, the problem is...
he's guilty.
Yeah, OK. The problem is, if you're a political party leader, the usual rules about innocent until proven guilty, frankly, are out of the window. I've had, in the last 2 months, I've had, this accusation that I was running memory sticks between the White House and Julian Assange. I can assure you it is total and utter baloney, but I still had to answer the question, because if I hadn't, people would have assumed I was guilty, Michael. So I think the normal rules of what is just and fair in a conversation just don't apply when you're leading a political party. And Michael, I honestly think if Corbyn continues to totally avoid doing interviews or answering this basic question, I think he'll be in a bit of trouble.
I agree with you there. But, in this particular circumstance where he is such a high-profile political figure, in a different situation to yourself, because obviously you weren't leading, the opposition in Westminster. And, it's so easy to find information about people who are in East Germany because the Stasi kept such
files,
records.
Which
it's incredibly easy for them to look at it and to initiate the process.
Well, if Corbyn...
whether or not he did it.
Well, you know what, Michael? If Corbyn doesn't apply for these files himself, the chances are those files will find public light of day anyway, and that could be even worse for him. So I think he's got to take action. Michael, I thank you for your call. If Jeremy Corbyn is innocent, he should ask for his files and publish them to prove this, I get. Linda from Durham says, I think Jeremy Corbyn's silence is not good. I think he should come out and defend himself. Well, he had a chance to do that tonight with his video to camera, but actually all he did was to initially try and laugh the whole thing off, saying everyone's gone a bit James Bond, although as someone said to me, James Bond was surely a good guy, not a bad guy. But anyway, and then to launch this pretty vicious attack on the media barons. Not sure that is going to work. Corbyn's denial of his links to foreign intelligence operatives turns into another lunatic left attack, blaming the press barons and threatening our envy of the world, which is our free press, and somehow portraying them as instruments of the far right. Well, there is a little bit of that going on. Look, we have a left-wing media, we have a right-wing media. If you're a Labour leader, you'll get a tough time from the Tory press. If you're a Tory leader, you'll get a tough time from the Labour press. And if you're Nigel Farage, you get a tough time from absolutely all of them. Leon is calling from Hastings in East Sussex. Good evening, Leon.
Yes, hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you again.
Good to speak to you again. So what do you think? Should Corbyn come clean on this, or is he right to just sort of brush it all away and treat it with contempt?
No, I think he seriously needs to address this issue. I have absolutely no doubt that there is something bubbling away underneath these accusations. And the reason being is that I've been involved in political activity, etc., for many, many years. And back in the mid to late 80s, I was around. Yes, I'm getting on a bit long in the tooth. Though I never have been a member of the Labour Party, though I have never been a member of the left, I was very involved and tended to be around the left quite often because there was a lot of issues that I supported that the left tended to sort of use the loudspeaker for. And so I would go to a lot of meetings, I would go to a lot of demonstrations, etc., that the left dominated. And to be honest, because I was never a Labour Party member and I would argue to some extent against the left, though I was more left-wing in those days because I was younger. You know that expression, If you're not social before you're 25, you've got no heart.
And after the age of 47, we tend to become conservative. Yeah, I know.
That's right.
Yeah. No. But Leon, time is pressing. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes, well, I know what the left wing was like in those days. And to be honest, I have no doubt that Corbyn had involvement with the Eastern Bloc. No doubt whatsoever. They were so Marxist in those days. They were so anti-British. They were so anti-anything to do with this country, to do with capitalism in inverted commas, that they would have done anything to undermine it.
Well, Jack Jones, who was a very big trade union leader, actually, after his death, it proved, was considered to be actually a very important asset by the Soviet authorities. So, and we had the Cambridge spies before and all the rest of it. Leon, some people did do those things. There is no evidence at all that Jeremy Corbyn was one of those. None whatsoever. But, as David says to me by text, that he's right. It's very simple. If he didn't meet them, he should simply apply for the records and prove he didn't and take the high ground over the press, which he would do. John is calling from Murcia in Spain, a new caller to the show. John, you've got 35 seconds and we're running out of time. The floor is yours.
Really, 35 seconds. Well, I don't see what all of this has got to do with the current situation. In the Cold War, in the whole history of things, a lot of stuff went on. A lot of people, both Tory and Labour, went on to be spies. But I don't see what it's got to do with now.
Well, I guess it's about judgment of character, John.
Right now.
It's about judgment of character, John. And the question that is being asked and that Corbyn needs to bat away is, did he do something that potentially was not in the interests of this country? And that's the question. John, I apologise. Long distance call. No time. We have run out of time. Huge amount of response to that question. All I can say is Agent Cobb, as he was known by the Czechoslovakians in those days, please come in, please tell us what happened. If you don't, these press, call them right-wing, call them what you will hound you and make your life a misery. You need to answer that basic question. Did you have those meetings or didn't you? You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow night at 7. I'll be live from Washington, D.C. Coming up at 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.